It's call to order. Roll call.
Mr. Alashewski. Ms. Bendixson. Here. Ms. Bernal Leon. Here. Ms. Blanchard. Here. Ms. Brown. Here. Ms. Burbs.
Present online.
Mr. Christ. Mr. Cooley. Dr. Day. Here. Dr. Flewelling. Here. Ms. Gamund. Mr. Glitzberg. Ms. Hammer-Levy. Here. Dr. Hershoren. Ms. Craw. Ms. Rosa for Mr. Miller. Here. Dr. Moyer. Ms. Powers. Mr. Pratt. Ms. Vogel for Mr. Freeman. Here. Mr. Provenzano.
Here.
Mr. Williamson.
Here.
Ms. Tyner. Chair, we have a quorum.
All right. Our first item is the minutes from the February 13th, 2026 Management Board meeting. Do I have a motion to accept? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on those items? All right. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Is there any member from the public who would like to speak this morning? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our action items. Number 4, the quarterly financial report. Ed.
So on page 8, this shows our activity for the first half of the fiscal year 2026 through March 31st, 2026. So the table indicates our total revenues and expenses for that first half of the year. Through the course of those first 6 months, we're at 1.38 million in terms of overall revenues, which is about 40%. And the thing I like to look at is the rightmost column on this table. It should indicate we're close to about 50% of what we projected back last August when we developed this initial budget. So we're a little bit behind in terms of revenues, and you'll see the footnote there for federal grants that we're still waiting for some project expenses to be incurred through this fiscal year to generate the revenue from those federal grants. We actually did a drawdown after this quarter closed. So we're a little bit closer than that, what's indicated there by the 10%. In terms of expenses, the bottom half of the table, a couple of footnotes there in terms of capital outlay, small equipment, hardware and software, as well as communication services. I mentioned this at prior board meetings. We're now about 96% in terms of those capital outlays and small equipment. And this was from purchase of a software that we did not have the license for, but we were borrowing from a partner, and we were no longer able to use that license, so we had to purchase it on ourselves. Also need to, in the next agenda item, adjust that line item up a little bit to accommodate replacement laptops for a couple of staff, as well as purchase some additional web software under the communication services. Our website contractor and vendor was actually moving and starting their own LLC. So some of the licenses we had under our web server will need to purchase and maintain as the Estuary program itself. So you see those items increased slightly in the mid-year budget amendment under the next agenda item, but in total, in terms of our expenditures through the first 6 months of this year, we're at about 1.3 million, which is about 32% of what we expected in our initial fiscal year 2026 budget. So overall, we're just looking to, again, pick up the pace in terms of contracted and consultant services, that line item through the course of this fiscal year to kind of make up the difference in terms of expected expenditures for this current fiscal year. I'll be happy to answer any other questions you might have on the quarterly report, but that's where we stand.
Any questions for Ed? All right, none. The action is recommend the policy board, or we recommend that the policy board accept the quarterly financial report. Do we have a motion? We have a motion and a second. All right. Any further discussion on this item? All right. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. Good morning, David. Moving on to action item number 5, the 2026 mid-year budget amendment.
On page 10 of the agenda packet, you'll see our proposed amendments for this current fiscal year. This is an optional sort of action item that we could take at the Management and Policy Board. And this just tries to bring our final budget a little bit closer to what we anticipated when we first developed the initial budget last August. So through the course of the first 6 months, we were able to make adjustments to that initial budget just to bring it a little bit closer to a final budget that we have to adopt in November. So in terms of revenues, slight reduction is anticipated federal expenditures. We've actually anticipating more fees and contracts completion of T-BERF projects, and we received a little bit more contributions and donations into the program than what we anticipated when we developed that initial budget back in August. With those changes, we're still proposing a slight reduction in total revenues for this year, about 5% reduction to 3.2 million. And then on the expenditure side, as I mentioned, we're making some slight adjustments with existing grants for the line items indicated, those capital outlays, small equipment, hardware and software, as well as communications software for our website hosting, just to accommodate those additional purchases. This is leftover budget that we haven't spent from prior fiscal year grants that we're just tasking for these expenditures this year. And then on the bottom part of the expenditures, the technical and communications contracts, slightly lower estimate than what we had going in last August to reduce it down to 2.7 million. And in total, just reducing our overall expenditures by about 0.4% to about 4.2 million. So those are the proposed mid-year budget amendments based on the revenues and expenditures through the first 6 months of this fiscal year. I'd be happy to answer any questions or on particular line items that you might have.
Any questions for Ed? Come on, guys. You're letting him off easy. None? All right.
Fun stuff, I know.
All right.
My life.
I feel you. I do. I really do. There we go.
Yeah.
You don't have to move, do you? You're off.
Sorry?
So you don't have to move, you're off.
No, our lease technically expires next April. There's a positive sign that NOAA actually renewed their lease this year, which expired in March. So we're optimistic that we'll be able to renew our lease and stay in the offices. We are planning to have an internal conversation to see if we want to still maintain the offices and potentially reduce those costs, look for shared office space. But so far, the plan is to stay in the offices if they allow us.
Any additional questions? All right, so the motion is that we recommend the policy board accept the fiscal year 26 mid-year budget amendment proposal. Do we have a motion? Do we have a second? Any further discussion on this item? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. All right, action item 6, third amended and restated interlocal agreement.
Yeah, so little deja vu from the February board meeting on page 11. We actually adopted the third amended and restated interlocal agreement at our February board meeting. But since that time, we actually had a request from one of our partners, Tampa Bay Water, for some minor modifications, both within the body and to the signature page of the adopted interlocal agreement. The changes are non-substantive. Basically, the request was to update their definition within section 1.3, paragraph 2 of the interlocal agreement. And then, as I mentioned, some slight modifications to their signature page. Because the one change occurred within the body of the document, our legal counsel recommended we bring this back to you all for adoption and ratification of these changes. We've actually informed 2 partners who actually have already provided signature pages of these changes, as well as partners that were going to their boards in the interim to get the interlocal agreement adopted. All of them, as far as I know, have accepted sort of these changes as part of their adoption process. But we would ask that any other partners going to the boards for full approval use this version if it's approved by the policy board tomorrow. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions, but just basically a formality to approve and adopt these changes in the interlocal.
we did take this to our governing board on Tuesday, and my understanding is they did switch it out, for the governing board, so this version, they put partner. Review, the significant.
Thank you, Viviana. And I know Hillsborough County went to their board Tuesday.
It was approved yesterday.
Yes, I'm sorry.
You knew the changes.
Excellent. Yeah, if there's any issues with the changes as potentially approved today or tomorrow by our policy board, please let us know, and we could have our legal counsels work with yours.
Right, so the action on this one is that we recommend the policy board approve the two changes requested by Tampa Bay Water and ratify the changes under the third amended and restated interlocal agreement as may have been acted upon by the members at the February 20th, 2026 policy board meeting. Do we have a motion? A second? And any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Action item number 7, the fiscal year 27 US EPA work plan.
So on page 12 of the packet, we kind of outline what has been presented already at the February board meeting in terms of our draft fiscal year 2027 EPA work plan. This basically becomes our grant proposal to EPA for congressionally appropriated funds to each of the national SJ programs that we match with our program through the interlocal agreement, local funding contributions from each of the partners. This year, we are basically level funded through those congressional appropriations at $850,000. We're able to match a portion of that with local cash from the interlocal agreement, and then we were able to make it up the full 50-50 match requirement with an in-kind project. And this year, the City of Largo proposed a project as a new member of the interlocal agreement funding partner to rehabilitate some of their lift stations as a proposed in-kind project that we'd use for that full match. So in total, this grant application becomes a $1.7 million grant to EPA that basically covers our core operating expenses, about 85% or so of our salary and fringe, and then all of our ancillary overhead in terms of operations. But we're also able to fund a certain amount of projects with the funds we have left over, and we usually target about $400,000 to $500,000 towards those projects. Those projects were previously presented to y'all at the February board meeting, and they haven't changed since that draft was presented. Several ongoing monitoring as well as new monitoring programs, as well as a habitat restoration project for the St. Pete Tire Reef that we've been working on, the proposed technical projects this year. Under the community outreach and education projects, our core volunteer engagement through Bay Mini Grants, through our Give a Day program, as well as our what's it called? The trash derby. Tampa Bay Debris Derby that we have been regularly holding fall under those community outreach projects, as well as support for an update to our Scoop the Poop behavior change campaign, educating pet owners on cleaning up after their pets. And then we also have some funds earmarked for the 8th Bay Area Scientific Information Symposium, which we hold about every 5 to 6 years, going back to the early 1980s, to communicate to area researchers, resource managers, sort of the latest state of the science in Tampa Bay. So in total, like I said, the total work plan grant is for $1.7 million. We are also, I just want to make note, trying to leverage about $35,000 in specialty license plate to fully fund the Habitat Master Plan implementation project. And that is, as I mentioned, to go to full design and permitting for the St. Pete Tire Reef and some proposed rehabilitation of that tire reef. There's an artificial tire reef that was sited off of Pinellas Point that we've been working on developing restoration plans for. So we're going to use the $25,000 from the work plan and an additional $35,000 from specialty license plate funds to fully fund those activities. And then last but not least, I did want to mention, as part of our annual work plans, and it's been sort of the policy of the Management Policy Board, even before my time, to set aside about 25,000 in local funding towards our non-federal reserve fund. And this is to build up basically a year's worth of reserves in case we have any issues with any of our funding sources in the future. This is also used to support some of our membership dues associated with the Association of National Shade Programs, some of that funding. So I just wanted to mention that because it is mentioned in the full work plan, but it's, you know, it's kind of just highlighted in the beginning part of that. So action item A and B relate to recommending approval of this work plan for approval by the policy board, and then to officially allow me to submit this as a grant application after the policy boards approves it tomorrow as the official grant application for the SRA programs fiscal year 2027. So that covers A and B. There is actually a new new item under agenda item 7C that I just wanted to briefly mention. This relates to our ongoing agreements using Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funds that we were awarded as a National SHAPE program over the years 2022 to 2026. This is a separate EPA agreement that we've identified 12 or so projects across many of our funding partners. It uses about 4.5 million in additional funding through those IIJA funds. We actually had a request from one of our partners, Hillsborough County, who is requesting to reassign funding that was originally earmarked for an Archie Creek stormwater restoration project to move those funds completely into another approved project, their septic to sewer conversions that were proposed under those IIJA funds. And that was just a request that we want to fulfill by the partner. And in order to do that, we'd have to officially submit an amendment request to EPA for their approval of reassignment of those funds from one project to another. So those encompass the three actions that we're looking for under agenda item 7A, B, and C. I'd be happy to answer any other questions or dive in a little bit deeper if you had any questions on the work plan or those changes to the IIJA agreements.
All right, guys. Are you all okay if we take A, B, and C as together? Everybody, just give me a head nod. Bob, nobody? Okay, there we go. All right. Do we have a motion to accept the action items A, B, and C as discussed? Do we have a second? Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Action item number 8, 2026 Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund projects. Jessica.
TBERF, Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund, is a competitive award program that we manage at the Estuary program. And it is a public-private partnership that a bunch of y'all here contribute to, including Hillsborough County and the Environmental Protection Commission, Manatee County, Pinellas County, Mosaic Community Foundation of Tampa Bay, Southwest Florida Water Management District, and several other private contributions like the Crossway Memorial Fishing Tournament, and other smaller contributions as well. The approximate total available for projects this year is about $800,000, and representatives from all the aforementioned contributors made up part of the review team that met in April to talk about these project proposals. We received 21 applications this year, totaling over $3.2 million in funding requests. So it was a pretty competitive year for TBERF this year. And appreciate all of y'all's contributions, both monetary and expertise, contributing to the review team, which Ed uses to make the recommendations before you today. So in front of you today are recommendations for 2026 projects. There are 6 being recommended for funding, totaling $810,346. There are restoration implementation projects, social marketing campaign, and an applied research project in front of you today. So I'm happy to answer any questions about the RFP process, review process, the projects in front of you, or the funding recommendations. And I do require one question every year, so somebody's gotta come up with something. Okay.
So if you could just comment on why these bids were selected, it looks like there's probably a lot of good projects proposed, so what brought these ones to the top?
Yeah, so the review team consists of contributors to the fund, and they use the criteria to score and provide findings about how much they would support funding. Ed takes those scores into consideration when creating the recommendations, as well as the comments and discussion that happened during the review team about the feasibility, the likelihood of success, what if monitoring is included, so many other of the TBRF criteria. So all of that information is taken into consideration as Ed makes his funding recommendations for these.
Plus the funding we have available based on the proposal we receive and sort of the recommendations of the committee of how to streamline some of the proposals and potentially cut from what they had proposed.
All right. Any further questions on this? Any discussion?
I can,
Okay.
there are two projects selected for Manatee River. I was just curious if that indicated a priority area for the review committee or TBEP individually.
I think that the oyster restoration is definitely one of the top funding priorities this year of those that we selected. So seeing two oyster restoration projects in Manatee County is a good thing for sure, and they're in different areas of Manatee County as well. So sort of spreading the habitat restoration love throughout the watershed.
Just to add to that, that area has been sort of at the forefront in terms of permitting and getting through the sort of approval process to do the actual oyster restoration. Did want to add that one of the projects will do both restoration of the Manatee River and in Safety Harbor, which is another priority area for us in Old Tampa Bay.
So for the projects that are recommended for less funding than was requested, is the scope reduced, or is there, how does that impact the project?
Yeah, both Jessica and Maya have reached out to those partners just to see if they would accept a reduced budget. And usually that entails a reduction in the scope that they proposed as well, based on the recommendations from each from the review committee.
Additional discussion? All right, I'm assuming we're going to have some folks recuse. Go. Is there anybody from Manatee County? No? All right. Is there anybody else here that's part of or a partner to any of the other ones except the estuary program one? Right, okay, well, then never mind. Usually we have recusals, so, all right. Everybody okay with us taking all three recommendations at once, which is the approving the list of projects and budgets, authorizing the executive director to enter into the contract, and then allowing the executive director to amend scope and budget up to $25,000 if additional funds become available. All right, so do we have a motion for those three actions? Second? All right, motion and a second. Do we have any additional discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. All right, executive director and staff reports.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly mention to y'all, you might have already received a save the date and invitation for what we're planning for the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund celebration this year. We actually surpassed over 100 projects funded at greater than $10 million this year. So we're be celebrating that accomplishment with our funding partners, as well as past grant recipients and grant recipients proposed for this year as well. On June 4th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. at the Tampa Garden Club. So encourage you all to attend. Please RSVP as soon as you might know that you'll be able to attend so that we could get a good head count for that venue. Jessica, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else, but we'd appreciate you guys' support and attendance.
I sent out an email invitation that I hope each of you got. Didn't let me know. Yeah, there's a link to RSVP, and you're welcome to bring multiple members from your entity to come hang out.
And just good, you want to talk about the Bay Mini grants? Just open up.
Pulling out of TBRF RFP right into Bay Mini Grant RFP. This year, the mini grant RFP opened on Wednesday and it'll close in September. We're gonna have at least 2 webinars to help applicants craft their applications for the mini grant. And I guess that's all I'm gonna say. It's a competitive award, I think you guys know, funded by the sales of the special Tampa Bay Estuary Specialty License Plate. If you have an opportunity to include the RFP in any sort of newsletter that y'all have for the entity that you work for, that'd be great. We would like to make sure that people across the watershed know about the funding opportunity and have the support they need to apply for it as well. And thank you, Maya. We did raise it to a $10,000 award this year. It's been $5,000 for quite some time. So seeing what that might look like from applications that we get this year.
Jessica. And then Michelle, you wanted to mention some proposed changes to our communication performance metrics.
Yes, thank you. So we have been reporting reach index metrics for some time, and looking at those, they give like a static look at the last few months. And my personal goal is to improve our social media performance, reaching new audiences, reaching more folks in the watershed. So I am interested in tracking the trend more than the static look. And I think that will tell you guys more the progress of how we are reaching the audiences and engaging with the audiences. So we'd like to propose changing, instead of these sort of static metrics that tell you we had 20,000 web views, going to something that's more like there's a % increase or decrease or whatever to track that change. And that's really it. I don't have anything fully fleshed out yet, so it's still very flexible, but we wanted to pose this to y'all in case there's anything that we were reporting that is really important for us to keep.
I was just going to say, I think the municipalities do partner and use some of the metrics from Tampa Bay Estuary Program for their MS4 reporting. If we talk about, scoop the poop or anything that would kind of impact our downstream, is this a truth? Or I'm asking, I guess, kind of a question.
Yes, that's correct. I think several of the local governments do reach out to us to get some information about these metrics and incorporate it into those required reports for their permits.
I would assume that, and this is awesome, and I'm super supportive, and I think that is more, that information put that way is maybe more useful, if we're trending up or trending down. But I would assume that you would not lose these statistics here.
We could keep recording them, and they're also very easy to go and get from the various metric and analytics sites.
Thank you.
I think the point is sort of, we've developed this report because prior boards indicated an interest in having some sort of, routine reporting on the effectiveness of our communications. And so the question for you all is this information helpful? And if not, what would be helpful? So Michelle's proposed, some of what would guide the work that she's doing and the kinds of communications strategies and tactics that she's selecting. But if there are specific things, not just that you like about this report, but that could also help inform your decision-making, we'd like to incorporate that too. So the permitting requirements, I think, is a helpful suggestion.
And I'll just add on to for what it's worth, the online component of the State of the Bay website does have long-term trends in some of our social media metrics, but that's only updated annually. So I think what Michelle's talking about is a more um, uh, continuous snapshot or look at the trends over time.
District has also done some surveys, like pre and post, to see effectiveness. Is that? The district has done surveys pre and post to see effectiveness of certain campaigns. And so maybe that's an opportunity here as well to see what the community thinks about the estuary program and its effectiveness, and then do an education campaign and then do a post survey. So just a suggestion.
I think you're going to love Blake's presentation.
Okay, can't wait.
Yeah, we've been internally discussing how to assess sort of the effectiveness of our different communications, and some of the surveying that Blake is going to be talking about will be sort of that instrument to hopefully gauge the effectiveness in the future. That was it for director and staff reports.
The Technical Advisory Committee report is on pages 16 through 17. And you can see the variety of reports, open science projects, presentations, committee meetings, and the TAC meeting, and links to all the presentations that were presented on March 18th. The next TAC meeting was moved to June 17th. So if you didn't get that notification, make sure that it's on your calendar, because that date had to be changed. I don't know, Maya, did you want to talk about the Old Tampa Bay meeting that's coming up? I didn't know where to put that, if it's really a TAC thing, or it's,
So the Old Tampa Bay Working Group is a sub-segment of the Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium. And so we'll be meeting, I forget what day the meeting is scheduled for. It's on the calendar.
End of May.
The 29th of May at Pinellas County Public Works, the facility near Drew Street off of US 19. That meeting is typically one that we keep to all of the entities that have a nitrogen load allocation to the Old Tampa Bay segment. At that meeting, we'll be discussing whether or not we ought to pursue developing and adopting voluntary management targets related to nitrogen loads and nitrogen load reductions in the Old Tampa Bay segment. Depending on how the conversation goes with that group, it may be something that we end up bringing back and working through the TAC to make sure that the TAC is on board. But because we understand that these are, sensitive topics that require lots of investment and, have, if not a direct and indirect connection to your permits and regulatory requirements, we want to make sure that that sort of tighter group is in lockstep with a direction moving forward before we sort of bring it to the full TAC and then work those ultimate management recommendations through the TAC to the management board and then the policy board, because we don't know if we'll actually end up in that place or not. That's sort of, we're in the early phases of that conversation.
So if you have any questions about the TAC, oh, sorry, did you?
I just add one thing. I just wanted to recognize Santino Provenzano, who has been the Nitrogen Management Consortium Industry Co-Chair for quite some time. We actually just had an election of a new industry co-chair, Ilya Balcom with Duke Energy, but I just wanted to recognize Santino's outstanding service to the program as a management board member, as well as the NMC industry co-chair. We appreciated his sage advice along the way, and he has been a true industry partner for all that we do through the estuary program, through support from the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund, the Technical Advisory Committee, to the Nitrogen Management Consortium. So thank you, Santino.
All right. If you have any questions about the TAC stuff, get with staff. Again, the links to all the presentations and everything are there. So feel free to peruse. All right, Community Advisory Committee report.
Thank you, Chair. The report you can find on page 18 and 19. We had 2 committee meetings, including one in March that had a really powerful agenda. I was thankful to be at that meeting. We had really strong, deliberative discussion about climate change and how we talk about it in our neighborhoods. So we all were tasked with picking a neighbor to have conversations and applying the messaging from TBEP. So I haven't done my homework yet, but I will. And I know that the other folks who were in attendance were excited to have those conversations as well and bring the results back to the next meeting, which is in June. You can see that we had 6 presentations in the last quarter, 11 events. We're, as Jessica mentioned, excitedly awaiting the Bay Mini Grant applications, and we have 5 that were completed from previous years, and 26 still ongoing. And like I mentioned, our next meeting is June 3rd, and we're looking forward to it. And that's it, Chair.
Thank you. All right, moving on to our discussion items. The first one is a project highlight, drivers of Pyridinium bahamense bloom variability. Carrie Lopez.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. I actually need to control it because we don't have PowerPoint up there. So if you just tell me when to advance the slides, I can do that for you. So Carrie is an algal bloom researcher at the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. She's been one of our longstanding partners taking a look at Pyridinium blooms up in Old Tampa Bay. And she's kind of going to give you an update of what's going on in that bay segment related to Pyridinium.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about some work we've done to look at factors influencing the variability of Pyridinium within blooms and among years. And I'm going to focus on 3 questions today. First, what are the factors that drive Pyridinium bloom phenology? What are the factors that influence short-term variability and interannual variability of blooms in Tampa Bay? And then finally, why have we not seen, I'm going to address some of the hypotheses for why we think we have not seen Pyridinium blooms in Tampa Bay the last 2 years. And so this slide just gives a quick review of some of the characteristics of Pyridinium. So it's an armored dinoflagellate. It uses flagella for motility, so it can vertically migrate in the water column. It produces saxitoxins, which can pose threats for human and wildlife health and cause shellfish harvesting closures. And it also importantly has a resting stage, which is the picture on the bottom, the black and white picture of the cyst there. And that's important because of the life cycle and the factors influencing. So we have at the end of the bloom, resting cysts are formed and they settle to the seafloor, as you can see in that seasonal diagram. And then they overwinter through the winter and then germinate the next spring. And so just quickly, Pyridinium has a tropical to subtropical distribution globally. And in Florida, we see it, you can go ahead. In Florida, we observe cells all along the coast, but we have a few areas that are more areas of concern. You can see by the red and orange dots, we have Indian River Lagoon, Tampa Bay, Pine Island Sound, are the areas that we have the higher biomass blooms that we've observed. And then this plot is really just to show the periodicity of blooms. So I have 4 regions here from top to bottom: Indian River Lagoon, Old Tampa Bay, Pine Island Sound, and the Pasco scalping zone. And so this is showing Pyridinium abundance over a 10-year period. That's on a log scale. And the point I want to make with this plot is that whether we have high biomass or low biomass occurrence of Pyridinium, we have the same periodicity in different regions in Florida. So we have the summertime peaks in abundance. And that is really driven by the annual cycle of temperature that influences the transition from different life stages of Pyridinium. So this, again, I'll go over this seasonal diagram. We have, as we know, blooms peaking in the summertime. And then at the end of the bloom, we have the resting cysts start to form. And at that point, they're dormant and can't germinate until they're exposed to winter temperatures. So the winter temperatures are really important for the timing of germination the next year. So then in late winter and early spring, we start to get the cysts coming out of the cells coming out of the cyst in the sediment and into the water column. And as the water column temperatures warm, the cells begin to divide faster and germination is occurring faster. So the timing of blooms is really predictable, but we are not yet able to predict bloom severity. So we don't quite understand what is driving the variability and severity from year to year. And so I'm going to talk today about some modeling we did with our routine data. So this is 13 years of data from our FWC's 9 sampling stations in Old Tampa Bay, which is shown in the map. And we have our 4 hotspot stations are just shown by the red dots. And then you can go to the next slide. So we fit a series of logistic regression models. And what we found was that temperature, salinity, prior 14-day rainfall, so cumulative rainfall over the prior 14 days, variability in resting cysts in the sediment, and the presence of a prior bloom were the most important predictors of bloom variability. But I will point out that for temperature, so these plots are showing scenarios of temperature and salinity, those are on the axes, and then I just have scenarios of low rainfall events, high rainfall events, low cyst environments, and high cyst environments. And you can see that the impact that the high cyst has, it basically doubles the probability of a bloom. And we can also see that high rainfall events increase the probability of the bloom. But the point I was going to make about temperature is that 95% of our summer temperatures occur within that range of peak probabilities, which just reinforces the idea that the temperature is really driving the timing of the bloom. But what's really driving the interannual variability and the within bloom variability are salinity, rainfall, and a source of cells, which is either resting cysts germinating or a prior existence of the bloom. And so I just wanted to show a couple examples of our predictions for a couple years to show how the predictions compared to observations. So these plots are showing our 4 hotspot stations with probability of a bloom on the y-axis, and that's the lines. And it's really hard to see, but on the top, the circles are indicating when we observed a bloom. And so this example is 2021, which was a severe bloom year, and you can see we had high probability of a bloom. But I wanted to show the different response. So for example, the first panel, station 1, is our northernmost station. And you can see there's a drop in probability that didn't occur at the other stations. And that was in response to Hurricane Elsa. So we had high rainfall, which increased probability at the other stations, but we had a dramatic decline in salinity at station 1 that was below the threshold that was ideal for pyridinium. So we had a drop in salinity at station 1. And we also, that was in concordance with our observations where we no longer saw cells at that station. So that's just an example. And then if we look at 2024, which is the next plot, this was the year we had no bloom. And you can see that for most of up until well into July, so this on the x-axis is Julian day, we had very low probability of a bloom. And then in August, and we had no observation of a bloom either. But then in August, we had an increased probability associated with Hurricane Debbie. But at that point, it was too late for the germinating cells, which germinate in spring, and there was also no pre-existing source of cells. There was no pre-existing bloom, so we did not see the prediction was not in concordance with our observations. And that just highlights the importance of the timing of the environmental conditions for pyridinium blooms specifically. That's not to say that other phytoplankton aren't going to take advantage of that flux of nutrients, but for pyridinium, the timing matters. And so we wanted to look more into this and how seasonal conditions might influence bloom severity. So we calculated an annual severity index that took into account duration, magnitude, and spatial extent of the bloom. And we did that actually for pyridinium and for chlorophyll. And I'm sorry you can't see the numbers because I was increasing my labels and I covered up the numbers. But on the top panel, that middle zero is actually a 1. So that would be the average. So above that middle zero would be above average. And you can see that we had a 5-year period of above average severity blooms from 2018 to 2022. Our 3 most severe years were 2018, 2019, and 2021. And then if you look at the chlorophyll index, the same thing, except it's the zero near the top is the average. So our most severe chlorophyll years were also our most severe pyridinium years. And so then when we looked at the relationship in the context of the bloom, remembering that summer is the period when we have the bloom manifestation and the peak, spring is the time when we have the bloom developing, we wanted to look at the relationship with some of the environmental conditions, and you can go to the next slide. And so starting with summer, again, this is June, July, August, when we have the peak abundances. This is also the time period of highest rainfall and highest nutrient loading. And we do not see a relationship with severity index and summer rainfall or nutrient loading. And that's not to say that those nutrients aren't being utilized, but there are probably other factors confounding that relationship. At the time where the bloom is already in its maintenance mode, there's probably reliance on internal nutrient cycling. We know from ambient nutrient monitoring, nitrogen monitoring, that those nutrients they seem to be taken up rapidly. So we just don't completely understand what's going on there. But the important take home from that is that the variability in summer nitrogen loading does not seem to be driving the variability in bloom severity. And so the next slide, when we look at spring, which is the time when cysts are germinating, the bloom is developing. So the cells are starting to grow more rapidly. We did see a significant linear relationship with rainfall and with nitrogen loading. We did have 2021 was an outlier with rainfall because that was actually a very dry spring, but it was also the year when we had the Piney Point release in spring. So when we look at nitrogen loading, that's that highest point. And we do see a significant linear relationship with bay-wide nitrogen loading, but not with OTB-specific loading. And that's a little perplexing, but even you'll see the highest point on that plot is 2021 because there was high bloom severity, but the OTB nitrogen loading wasn't as high that year. Even if we remove that spot, we still don't see a significant relationship. And that just highlights the likely importance of the connectivity between different base segments. Okay. Another factor that was influencing the variability, important influencing the variability of bloom severity was resting cyst abundance in the sediment. And so this bottom plot shows cyst abundance in the vicinity within 2 kilometers of our hotspot stations in years where we did sediment surveys. And this work was in collaboration with Hillsborough County and supported by Tampa Bay Estuary Program. And what you can see from this bottom plot is that in 2024, we saw a significant decline in resting cysts in the sediment within the vicinity of the hotspot stations. Whether or not this was due to lower cyst input from 2023 and 2024, or due to sediment redistribution, we are unsure of that. But you can go to the next slide. Just to show the impact, though, of that reduced cyst abundance in the sediments on the predicted probability, we have the top panel showing, or the top row showing high cyst abundance predictions for 2024. And when we reclassified those stations as low cyst, the probability of a bloom reduced by half. And so this work together is showing that at least 2 conditions seem to be contributing to the lack of recent blooms in Tampa Bay. One is less than favorable conditions during spring for the pre-bloom development, and 2, lower cyst abundance in the sediment. So pyridinium has a decreased competitive advantage. And then, I think I just summarized this, but essentially Conditions in spring are important to set the stage. Conditions in summer are important to maintain a bloom. And then resting cysts or a pre-existing bloom or a kind of a precursor to observance of a bloom. And then you can go to the next slide. And then I just wanted to say, going forward in OTB, an important point to note is that we do still see cysts in the sediment, and they're not, there's still a substantial number of cysts. So the risk for blooms is not gone. And so it will be interesting to see how things develop, in the coming years, and how we can kind of look at what's happened in other regions of the world where they've had recurrent pyridinium blooms that have disappeared for a few years, but then they've come back. So I think we still have to consider that the potential for blooms exists. And I think we still need a better understanding of what exactly is going on with nutrient transport and transformation, and how that's relating to variability and what we're seeing with blooms. And then just finally, even if pyridinium blooms don't occur, we can still have other algal blooms. So this on this bloom severity index in 2024, where we had no severity, practically zero for pyridinium, chlorophyll was still like average. So, I mean, it wasn't a severe chlorophyll year, but it was, it wasn't like it was really low. And that was because we had blooms of other dinoflagellates. So just important to consider. And I think that's it. And yeah, thanks for having me. And I'll answer any questions if there are any.
Thanks so much, Carrie. It's super awesome research. I have 2 questions and then a comment. And sorry if you covered this, where do the cysts lie in the sediment? Are they in like the top, couple centimeters, or do they kind of bury themselves, I don't even know, down in? And then also, is there a difference in sediment type? Like, do we find more sediments in kind of mucky, flocculent sediments versus sandy? And then I guess a comment on how can the management board, and more so probably the policy board, help this? Thank you.
So the first question about where the cysts are in the sediment. So when they are in their resting cyst stage, they are immobile. And so they essentially just settle to the sediment, but they're distributed throughout. So they're not just in the very top layer. The top layer of cysts are likely the most important ones for seeding the next bloom, but we do get resuspension events. We get burial of cysts in the sediment just through natural processes. So we've taken sediment cores and we have resting cysts in sediments that are 100 years old. So pyridinium has been, whether or not it has been blooming in Tampa Bay, we know it hasn't been, the recurrent blooms are a more recent phenomenon, but we know that in the past, pyridinium has been present in some, abundance at some point because of our sediment core data. And then where they settle, we tend to find pyridinium cysts in more abundance in areas where we have finer sediments. And that's probably just hydrodynamics, because that's where they're settling out with those finer particles. And in addition, another factor that's contributing to that distribution is where the blooms occur, because we're also seeing the blooms in the areas with the longer residence time. So I think that there's sort of just like a positive feedback. So we have the blooms there, we have more cyst input, we have more retention. So that just, favors the sort of building of a seed bed. And then what can you all do to help? That's a hard question for me. I think continued interest and support of the research to answer some of these questions that we still don't understand is important. And we have, pyridinium issues in emerging areas. And for example, recent closures for scalp harvesting in the Pasco zone, pyridinium not necessarily, not in high abundance there. It's actually in relatively low abundance, but there's still the toxin issue when they're in low abundance, which is not as much of a problem for Tampa Bay because of where they occur. But yeah.
I know Carrie said it was hard, but she has worked with us and others on a NOAA Actionable Science grant so that we can break down the things we think are most likely to influence the future probability of pyridinium blooms in Old Tampa Bay. The first thing is to continue to reduce nutrient loads because these pyridinium are mixotrophs. They're able to utilize a variety of different nutrient sources, and so that's always going to help. But we also think that it's important to increase cellular loss, and we've identified two primary strategies to do that. The first is to improve circulation in that bay segment. That's why we've been working with the Florida Department of Transportation, the City of Clearwater, and others to pursue causeway modifications to facilitate better water flow out of that bay segment. And then the third thing is to look at some grazing by strategic deployments of oysters. There are lots of questions about whether or not we can do that at scale and what other sort of feedback loops that might incur in that bay segment. We're primarily talking not about the kinds of oyster restoration projects so much as what you typically see us pursue, but using more of these aquaculture techniques where you're raising oysters in bags, suspending them at mid-depth, and you're swapping the oysters out before they experience mortality so that they're not accumulating these saxitoxins and dying. So those are the things that we think might work. We haven't, done any of them at scale to tell you that absolutely it's a banger of a solution, go forward. But these are all three no regret strategies that would produce a lot of different co-benefits, not just for pyridinium. This is the best state of the science that we have for Old Tampa Bay and pyridinium.
Thank you, Baya. That was great.
Yeah, and at the risk of being repetitive, the reason we're having Carrie talk today is when we were presenting at the board meetings, the first one of the quarter, we were given State of the Bay updates of what was going on with water quality and how it's been the last couple of years. And within the reasonable assurance period that we're currently in, and this is for, how we assess compliance towards regulatory thresholds, primarily with the NMC. For the last 4 of the 5 years for the current period, we've met chlorophyll standards. It's been green, everything's good. And that's a great thing to say because, we want to see good water quality. But if you look at the prior RA period, we had 4 of those 5 years where we exceeded the chlorophyll threshold. And that, is from basically nutrient loads, as Maya said. Pyridinium was a factor there as well. And so when we're talking about what's going on recently with the State of the Bay and regulatory compliance, water quality has been good, but that's primarily been because it's been dry. And we also talked about the lack of pyridinium blooms that we've seen last year, 2024, and I think the end of 2023 when it started tailing off. And so there are a lot of questions about, well, what's going on? Well, yes, it's been dry, but why have the pyridinium blooms also gone away? And so we wanted Carrie to come here. This was actually a request from the policy board to talk more about some of the work that she's done looking at this and, cyst abundance in the sediments, lack of rainfall. Those are the two key things that I'm getting from this is that, what's explaining the loss of pyridinium. So I think the take home here is that, as Maya said, the strategies that we can pursue as sort of no regret strategies, they haven't really been done at scale to really see, does that have a benefit? And we know it will have a benefit, but they haven't been done. So the point is, when the rain probably will come back, we're going into El Nino, the pyridinium threat, I think, is not necessarily gone. So this is sort of a cautionary tale where, yes, we have seen less pyridinium, but it's largely a factor of reduced rainfall. So we need to continue making these investments into these large scale projects because, with the whole reasonable assurance plan and the assembly capacity project that we've pursued in Old Tampa Bay, we know that there's still work to be done and it's just been dry. And that's just to, roll the dice, I think, that why we're seeing good water quality. Is that accurate?
Any additional questions for Carrie?
Carrie, what's your prediction for this year?
I think Tampa Bay is going to be, well, you know, I don't want to say this because I might jinx it, but we haven't seen sales yet. It has been a dry spring. And we know the cysts are there, but they're lower. So hopefully we won't have a pyridinium bloom this year, but don't hold it against me if we do.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the severity index that was developed for both pyridinium and chlorophyll in Tampa Bay? Is there transferability to the other regions that we've seen it? And are there any sort of mirroring trends in those other areas?
That's something we need to look at. I think the next step is to take some of these lessons we've learned from this analysis and apply it to other regions. And we have, I think, one of the most robust data sets in Old Tampa Bay. And so that's why we started, or that's one reason we started there. And so as you see here, I don't have the sampling effort shown here, but if you look at sampling effort, I have another plot like this that shows the zeros. And we have lower sampling effort in like the Pasco zone and some other regions. So that can be a challenge. But now, we've in the past few years, we've definitely increased the sampling effort there and can work with partners too to look at some of these questions and patterns.
Last couple of years, like we haven't had roots in the Bay, but we are seeing issues in Pine Island Sound and
Yes, correct. Yes, we had the first ever closure 2 years ago, the Pasco zone for scalloping, and again last year. And we also had a closure. We had Pine Island Sound closures, and we also had a closure in the Panhandle, I believe. We at least had a pyridinium issue, and I know there was I think there was another toxin. There was a domoic acid, but I think they also had PSP. But you might know better than me on that.
We're not seeing it in Tampa Bay, but we're having
Yes.
to put out fires in other areas now
Yeah.
related to it. And it seems like, once you start having those blooms and the cyst beds develop, you're going to continue to have those blooms. But, you need and I guess we do have it in Pasco, more of an enclosed area to retain them. Like, do you anticipate those areas becoming more severe?
So the Pasco it's a little bit tricky because we've really not seen very high abundances there, and the toxins are the issue there. We did some sediment sampling last year, and the cysts are very low. So I don't know if we continue, because I think if we go back and look at Pine Island Sound, like years ago, it's become a more regular occurrence there. So I don't know over time, but if we will start to see more cysts like in the Pasco zone and it become more of a recurrent issue, but it's less it's not as, the area is less retentive. So,
Right. I know that we've been surprised by what we've seen in the scallops based on the counts that are present. But one thing that we're really not doing, and we probably could to kind of put that in better context. So when we get shellfish, no matter where it's from, we're looking at it for brevetoxin and domoic acid. We do not routinely do saxitoxin. But given this kind of weirdness, it might behoove us to start doing
right. Because, just from looking at the map that I showed initially of the Florida coast, we do see pyridinium, at low abundances in all along the coast, really.
So the cysts, are they only viable for that one season?
No, they're kind of like plant seeds. And so they do lose viability over time, but we've germinated cysts from 20 centimeters depth that are older. And so
that way 2 years.
I believe that was like 1970s. I would have to go back. That's just like a total. It's been years since I Yeah, yeah. So, yeah. And I know other dinoflagellates, like people have isolated via not pyridinium, but in other regions of the world and with other cyst-forming dinoflagellates, cysts have been isolated from 100-year-old sediment that have been viable. So, but that does, the cyst abundance decreases. Like they're very low abundance deep in the sediment because they do die over time or they get reworked and consumed, like it just processes happen. But if we do have a resuspension event, we actually had a study funded by TBERF where we looked at viability in the top 5 to 10 centimeters of sediment, and like in that layer, they're happy and germinating, just like the 5 centimeter cysts are germinating just as much as the cysts in the top centimeter.
You're just aging them by where they're sitting in the sediment, or is there a way to?
Well, so for that study, we did, we worked with USGS and we were actually looking at short-term turnover. And so they did beryllium isotope, and we're looking, because we were wanting to know if the cysts that were at 5 centimeters had been in contact with the surface, like in the last year. And so that's what our question was there, to see how old they were. But for the older, we did lead-210, well, we didn't, USGS did lead-210 dating for the older, the deeper sediment. Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Just as we start looking at some of that cut throughs and improving some of that, part of that is some maintenance dredging that goes on. So if you're doing that maintenance dredging and taking off part of that upper layer, do we think that's going to help significantly? Also realize it's smaller sections that we're doing that in.
I don't know. My gut says that small things like that would not have much of an impact as far as like removing sediment, just because of the expansiveness. But I really don't. I think that would require some calculations and modeling. I haven't looked at that, but I would guess that if depending on how large of an area that is, I would worry potentially about resuspension and events like that, and so it could have a positive effect, it could have a negative effect, yeah.
Yeah, that was going to be a question that I had too, if there were any research done on targeting maybe certain areas where, like you're saying, there's a lot of activity with these cysts, to just remove them out of that system to make improvements, maybe just in those areas. I don't know if anything has been done, but I hear your concerns too about the suspension. Obviously would be a concern.
Yeah. I don't think that I know of, this is more out of my area. I know they've done like muck removal in the Indian River Lagoon, but that's not, the target hasn't been pyridinium cysts. I don't know if anyone's looked at how that has potentially, but we still have, pyridinium blooms in the IRL. So I don't know if anyone, I don't think people were looking at the impact on cysts for that. And I don't know how large scale or where that occurred. I'm less familiar with the, how that was done. I think there are a lot of things to consider doing something like that, because, we also have, this is also the area where we have a lot of seagrass loss. So I don't know, it's not just in the deeper sediments where we have cysts there. So, just disturbing habitats, and I think there's lots of concerns with that, I guess.
But based on what you showed us today, would you, like, if there is going to be dredging, would you recommend that it's like done in the fall, or like in certain times of year where resuspension won't necessarily lead to a bloom?
That's a good question. The cysts would be dormant in the fall, I guess. If dredging, if you're bringing cysts up to the surface, I guess though they're still going to be going through that dormancy cycle and become, non-dormant in the spring. I would have to think about that. I just don't know how that would, what the benefit would be of changing the timing. Certainly, if you did it in the time period of germination, it could be, I think that let me walk back again. I do see that that could be an issue because you could be really creating more of a cell source for that. Because really the competitive advantage comes from that flux of cells. And so like if you're increasing the number of cysts available in the time period that's optimal, then that's going to increase the chances for a severe bloom. So in that sense, yes, maybe that would make sense to think about the timing with that period. Yeah.
Great conversation. Anything more? Ed's got his
Just add some additional thoughts. I think this is why you heard some of our staff kind of talk about these no regret sort of choices in terms of continued nutrient load reductions and working to improve tidal circulation or oyster restoration to try to remove the cysts in the environment as well. So those are sort of like the no regrets options that we've outlined that aren't as sort of aggressive as sort of dredging activities. We do, that's additional research that needs to be kind of explored if that becomes an option, especially with additional circulation improvements in the bay where, ancillary dredging might prove to be a benefit of removing cells as well. But again, that requires additional information, but I do just want to put the notion out there, usually in the environment, there's no niche left unfilled. So even if we're controlling pyridinium, as Carrie alluded to, we're seeing other dinoflagellates take that space. So we're still trying to control for a chlorophyll condition that's going to improve light environment for seagrasses in that base segment. So even if we solve the pyridinium issue and we ignore sort of the nutrient or other circulation related issues in the western part of Old Tampa Bay, we're likely to have some other species fill that niche. And that, I don't know if you could offer any insights in other areas like the Indian River Lagoon, even if they don't have a pyridinium bloom, they have a bunch of other things blooming.
Yes. Yeah. And
it's kind of filling that.
We did, we had a shorter time series that we looked at, and there's a paper that we published in 2021, I think, and we had we were predicting pyridinium blooms similar to this, but a different approach. And we found that the model worked well, except in the presence of brown tide. So if brown tide was there first and sort of filled that niche, then pyridinium didn't bloom. So I think we do have to be really careful about just solving one problem and opening up the door for some, yeah.
And just to add one other thing, you guys all just approved some TBRF projects. And one of those projects is working with the University of Florida, looking at some of the internal nutrient cycling. So hopefully we'll start, chipping away at some of that knowledge gap in terms of the internal nutrient cycling that might be driving some of these blooms, including pyridinium, with that research.
Right. Anything more? All right. Seeing none. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Carrie.
All right. Blake is going to come up and give us an update on the Baywide Satisfaction Survey results.
You got a whole hour and 45 minutes, Blake.
Perfect. All right. So, I'll go through some of the results that we have from our Baywide Satisfaction Survey. Funnily, that we have an hour and 45 minutes because when I gave this, our results for all of the survey results internally to our staff, it took exactly an hour and 45 minutes to go through everything. But I'm going to spare you guys that. So it's just going to be very high level. There's a lot of stuff that's not going to be talked about. But we're going to have a bunch of meetings over the course of the next few months, where at each of the meetings, I'll dive deeper into some of these. Eventually, there will be a report that comes out that lays out probably tons of pages of this stuff. So there's more opportunities to learn more. But basically, as a reminder, we talked about it. We collected this data between February and March of this year. Basically, the idea is that we've got our 2027 CCMP revision coming up, and we wanted to think about what are some ways that we can kind of start this process, get some ideas about where we want to go, where the community wants us to go, get a temperature check on some of the progress that we've made in the past, and get an idea of where people want us to go. So the goal for this survey was really to, here, let me see if I can move this guy. There we go.
The green bar, it might hide that too.
The green bar.
Just click on the green.
This guy? Yeah. Go away. Oh, I don't know. Okay. Well. Don't know. Is it gone now? All right. So basically what we did was we created this survey and sent it out. We, of course, wanted to send it out to the folks that are familiar with us, the folks that have experience with us. We call this the in-network audience. So these are people that are either directly connected to us through our email lists or our committees, our subcommittees, but also the people that are connected to the people that we're connected with. So this is if some of our partners helped distribute that survey and then somebody took it. So they're indirectly linked to us. We also sent out some requests to specific practitioners with expertise in water quality in Tampa Bay, as well as restoration practitioners, because of course we're interested in their opinions, but there's also some questions where we wanted to see where the expert opinions may differ from the public's opinions and how that might be informative to us. But then, of course, we also have the broader public. So we don't just want feedback from the folks that we know and that know us. We also want to send it out to the larger community. So we've done this over a span of 2 months. We have almost 1,000 people that ended up taking it. This is for anyone who lives within our watershed boundary. The results I'm going to talk about are going to be in context of this spread that we have here. So the largest representation for both of these two audiences that we have was from Hillsborough County, followed by Pinellas, and then for our in-network, mostly Manatee and a few Polk County residents. The public, we have a relatively similar spread across Manatee, Pasco, and Polk counties, with just a little sliver of Sarasota County. There's a lot of stuff that is in the Baywide Satisfaction Survey. The biggest one that I'm going to talk about today is stuff specifically regarding our past CCMP actions and where folks would like to see us go in the future. And so our full CCMP has over 30 actions in there. And so we didn't want to present people with more than 30 actions and get their feedback on them. As much as we would love that, we don't expect people to do that. So as a staff internally, we looked for 10 actions that we thought we would really value early initial feedback on. So we have those 10 different actions that I'll talk about. And for each of them, we wanted to know what the community thinks in terms of the relevance of that action, of that issue for their area, the progress that they think that we have made on those actions, how feasible they think it is to achieve it in the next 10 years for our future CCMP, as well as how important it is for this next 10-year period. But we also included other things. So we also wanted to get an idea of their perceptions of TPEP as an organization. We wanted to better understand what the community thinks about our image. So our credibility, our reliability, our role in the community, the activities that we offer to people, their satisfaction with those, but also their level of interest if they're not familiar or they haven't participated with us before. the value of our resources that we provide to the community. So thinking about our communications, our open science products, various things like that, and the value and use of it to the community, but also our performance as a partner organization in distributing and distilling information about the Bay and communicating those to the public. We also wanted to know a little bit about their perceptions of different types of habitats. And so we included some different types of shoreline designs as well as different types of native habitats. And we really wanted to see, of these different habitat types, what habitats are most desirable to the community? What types of habitats would they like greater access to closer to where they live? And what characteristics they assign to those different things. So things like aesthetic beauty of them, the perceived social value, the economic value, the level of safety, different sort of things like that, because we want to start getting into a better idea of all of the different habitats that we could offer for different nature-based and conservation solutions across the Bay. Where are we going to get the most pushback, maybe, from certain types of designs or habitats, and where is there greater support? Similarly, we also wanted to gauge perceptions of water quality. And so this is mostly thinking about messaging. We see a lot of different images of the Bay and thinking about, the importance, especially for a lay audience, how important an image is in conveying a message about water quality, regardless of what the text might be saying. So what we did was we included images of underwater quality as well as surface waters. And we wanted to see, based off of those visual cues, how good or bad they thought the water quality was for that image, how normal they thought that condition was for the Bay, as well as various characteristics of it. And then the last thing we included some questions about their experiences with nature, both past and present. This includes direct experiences with nature, as well as what we call indirect. And we wanted to see how this is changing over time. Again, I'm just going to focus the majority of this on our CCMP specific questions, but I'll do some highlights of all the other ones along the way as well. So in terms of getting feedback on our CCMP actions, the 10 actions that we talked about, I'll just show a brief highlight of what they are so that as we're going through, you have an idea of which actions we're talking about. We have our SW1, our fertilizer ordinance actions. This is about reducing nitrogen runoff from urban landscapes through our fertilizer ordinances. We've got our reclaimed water action, so expanding the beneficial use of reclaimed water. Emerging contaminants, identifying and understanding these contaminants of concern. Assessing human and environmental health indicators suitable for recreational waterways. Encouraging habitat enhancement along altered waterfront properties, so our living shorelines action. Enhancing the ecosystem value of tidal tributaries. Minimizing the impacts to wildlife and habitats from dredging activities. Promoting public involvement in Bay restoration and protection. Providing for and managing recreational uses of the Bay, so recreational access. And then the last one that we had folks evaluate was our climate adaptation action, so improving the ability of our habitats to adapt to a changing climate. And the way this worked was for all of the participants, they read a brief summary of what that action was. And then if they were a partner organization of us, so if in our CCMP we identified their employer as one of the parties responsible for achieving this action, we specifically asked them, to their knowledge, has their organization made significant progress on this? And this is a way for us to gauge from all of our partners what achievements have been made over the last 10 years. And for everybody else, they got these other questions. And so we asked them how relevant the particular action was to the city that they lived in, so this local relevance that they have. The relevance to the Tampa Bay region as a whole, so it's a bigger picture type of relevance. The relevance to the groups that they belong to or the people they identify with, so this is a social relevance of this particular action. The progress that we have made over the last 10 years. Now, again, members of the public, so even lay people are able to answer this just based off of their own perceptions living in the region. This feasibility over the next 10 years, that was explicitly only saved for people that are our partners of this action. And then finally, the overall level importance for the next 10 years for that given action. So these are some of the high level results that we have regarding what is important to people for our CCMP. So the major sort of takeaway is that by and large, all actions that we presented are considered important to the community. So that's great in the sense that all of these things, they have support for them. We're not going to have huge pushback from the broader community on any of these things. People are happy to go forward with them. On the negative side, it doesn't help us too much in terms of prioritizing things. But we do see some priorities kind of coming out specifically for the public, and that's mostly around emerging contaminants and health indicators. We do see that of those different characteristics, the regional relevance of a particular action is the most influential factor in determining how important that action is for the next 10 years. And we do see some regions that show variation at the local level for specific actions. Big picture takeaways in terms of progress that we've made and how the CCMP has been used. Our partners report the greatest achievements in recreational access, public involvement, living shorelines, and fertilizer ordinances. The lowest achievements from our partners, the emerging contaminants, dredging impacts, health indicators, and tidal tributaries. And we did also notice that the majority of people who are using our CCMP are primarily using it to seek knowledge or for personal impact. So I'm going to go and do some breakdowns into each one of these just to get a better idea of how we came up to these results. So first, we asked folks for all of the different CCMP actions that we have here, how important it was to them over the next 10 years. And the darker colors indicate a higher level of importance, and the lighter colors represent a lower level of importance. And so again, here you can kind of see this is for the general public. Across the board, there's not a whole lot of variation, and in general, people feel that all of these actions are very important, or at least highly important to them. But we do see two of them kind of inching out ahead of each other, and that's the emerging contaminants and the health indicators. So those appear to be the highest level of importance to the members of our public. Now, if we compare that to our in-network audience, so these are our experts, these are the people that are familiar with us and that engage with us more often, we can kind of see some different priorities that are emerging here. Specifically, amongst our in-network, the largest importance is given to our living shorelines as well as the fertilizer ordinances for the next 10 years. And it's important to also recognize that we have kind of differing opinions between the public and our in-network audience, in that the emerging contaminants and health indicators, which are the largest priority for the public, are one of the lowest priorities amongst our in-network folks. So as we move forward in creating our CCMP, we're going to have these conversations about what role are the emerging contaminants and health indicator actions going to play. Do they need to have a larger role given the greater importance that the public is placing on them? Maybe we think about how ubiquitous those actions can be subsumed within other actions so that everything kind of has like a little key piece of those things that the public finds important. So those are kind of important conversations that we're going to have based off of this information. So I wanted to see, given how everything was kind of important to the public, I wanted to see of the different characteristics that we had, which of them best predict the level of importance that people place on it. And these are just some of the results from the models that we did created for each of these actions. And basically the big takeaway is that they're all important. So if you believe that an action is more locally relevant to you, you're going to think it's more important. If you think it's more regionally relevant, you're going to think it's more important. If it's socially relevant, or if you think a lot of progress has been made, you're going to think it's more important, pretty much across the board. But the biggest one by far is that regional relevance that I talked about. And so this is actually quite a good result in the sense that we crafted this question being worried that people would only say something is important if it was relevant to the city that they lived in. And since we see that the regional relevance is actually the most important, that's great news in terms of messaging, of framing. We don't have to make everything about a local issue. We can say, hey, just because this isn't a big issue maybe for your area, doesn't mean that it's not still important for the entire Tampa Bay CCMP. So that's really good news in terms of how we write and communicate the CCMP in the future. That still doesn't mean that local relevance isn't important. So we did collect information about the zip codes that people were coming from so that we could create some of these spatial maps to compare differences across the region. Here's just one example that I've highlighted for 4 of the actions that had the most variation across the region. And here you can see for zip codes that had more than 5 people represented in them, the average local relevance that they assigned to these different actions in their area. And the good thing about this data is that you can really sort of zero in and look at all kinds of different neighborhoods across all kinds of different actions. But to help kind of reduce that level of noise, I just want to draw your attention to these 3 areas that appear to have a relatively high amount of variation across the board. So when we think about, Pasco County, Northern Polk County, those ones are higher levels of variation that we can think about. Also, Lower Hillsborough County, Northern Manatee County, another area where we see greater variation in what people consider to be locally relevant to them. And so this is another thing where we can do deeper dives, have conversations to say, okay, why do you think these communities are considering these things less or more important? Do we agree with that? Do we think that reflects where our emphasis needs to be placed in the CCMP over the next few years? If not, if we think, these people don't realize how important this is to the area, we then need to think about, okay, how do we communicate to make that community see the importance of this? And how do we maybe include examples in our CCMP that highlight the importance for these areas where people may not think it's as relevant to them? And then in thinking about the progress that we've made, so this is specifically results from our partner organizations and how many of them said that they had made significant progress on these actions over the last 10 years versus those that were not sure or said that we had not made significant progress on them. And the big ones where people said we have made the most progress, have had these achievements, it's mostly in living shorelines, public involvement, recreational access, and fertilizer ordinances. So that's the area that our partners at least are saying we've made the most progress. The areas where our partners are saying we've made the least progress, those emerging contaminants and health indicators, but also our tidal tributaries and the dredging impacts. And so this is another one where now as a group, as a TAC, as a habitat restoration consortium, we can get together to really sort of think about, okay, are these actually reflective of the progress that we think has been made, and what do we do about it? How do we incorporate this into the next CCMP? For the areas that have more progress, do they get less emphasis in the next 10 years of our CCMP? Do we highlight things like emerging contaminants and health that have had less progress made over time? And then we also wanted to help sort of revision what our CCMP is and what we want it to be used for. So we also asked everybody what reasons they had for using the CCMP in the past. And there's a bunch of different potential reasons that people could have provided, but I'm going to highlight the main ones here. People are primarily using the CCMP to learn about what issues are affecting Tampa Bay, to learn about the actions that we are planning to take and that our partners are planning to take to address those issues, and also how they can personally help. So what it is that they can do to help contribute to solving these issues. And so basically those 3 really highlight that people are going here as mainly just a knowledge base, just a place to absorb information, get an idea of what the big picture is. But people aren't necessarily using it as much to really sort of come up with new projects or to explicitly find a solution to a problem that they are currently having. So that's also going to help us think about what is the primary use of the CCMP? You know, are we happy with it just being, this is where you go to learn about the Bay and the issues that are affecting it? Or do we really want to emphasize the sort of tool side of it? So we want you to go here when you have a problem, when you have a project that you're working on. We want it to be something that's a bit more accessible, a bit more practical in its use. So those are other conversations that this is going to help us start to have. Those are the big takeaways for our CCMP relevant questions, but of course we do also have several other things. So I'm just going to quickly touch on little bits of each of these that are relevant to our CCMP thinking. So the high-level results regarding people's perceptions of the estuary program. On the good side of things, 3/4 of people generally consider us to be a credible and unbiased source of information about Tampa Bay. And this particular number comes from people that are not familiar with us. So these are people that have never heard of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program before, but on their first impression, just hearing what the estuary program is, how credible or reliable do they think we would be? And so that's important when we think about all the people that may not know about us, whenever they see this, when see something that we publish, see a staff member quoted in a newspaper or something like that, it gives us an idea of the level of credibility and trust that people might have. But on the negative side of it, and I say negative with sort of a little asterisk, we do see that 2/3 of people say that they trust the estuary program to make decisions that are going to be in their best interest. Now, again, this is actually quite a good result. 2/3 of people saying that they trust us to make decisions on their best behalf, but it is the lowest of all of the indicators that we had. So thinking about how can we help increase people's sense of trust that we have their best interests in mind. Some other things of the resources that we asked people about and how useful they were to us, to them. The majority of them said that the open science products that we offer are the most useful to them, 83% of them. On the negative side, in terms of our performance, we had 60% that said that we are excellent at synthesizing and distributing information about Tampa Bay. And so that's another area where, yes, 60% is generally a good score, but thinking about, okay, how can we do a better job of this? You know, synthesizing all of the information that people have about the Bay and making sure that it gets out there to the public. In terms of thinking about those habitat evaluations, so as a overview, basically what we did is we created, we took pictures of 4 different types of shoreline designs as well as native habitats in the area. And we presented one of these images to the participants, and they represent basically a range or a diversity of different shorelines from hardened to natural, as well as native habitats from uplands to oysters. And after we presented it to them, we asked them, how much would you like to have a place like this closer to your home? So this level of desirability. And then we also asked a bunch of different characteristics. So aesthetic beauty, perceived safety of the habitat, the economic or social value of the habitat, and things like that. So we really wanted to gauge across these different types of designs and habitats what people's preferences were. And I'm just going to focus on the shoreline designs for this one. So if you want to learn more about the native habitats, you can come to a future HRC meeting that we have. But basically, the key results that we've had here, the seawalls and riprap shoreline designs are the most desirable to the public. So if we look at the overall desirability score, you can see our seawall, riprap, reef ball, and oysters. The desirability overall for our seawalls and our ripraps are pretty much equal, but much higher than our reef balls and our oysters, with the reef balls having the lowest level of desirability to them. And then this is an example where we wanted to see, wouldn't it be fun if we compared this with our experts? So I wonder if you guys can guess what the views of the restoration practitioners in Tampa Bay were. What a shocker. The seawall is not desirable at all, and the oyster is very desirable. The key message here is that we're seeing a very different opinion of the public versus our restoration practitioners, the people who are advocating for this, the people who are designing these. And so that may pose an issue. In terms of thinking about the most important characteristics that predict how desirable a habitat is going to be, we found that the aesthetic beauty, the perceived economic value, and the perceived safety of that area for visitors were the most important things. And what does that look like across the board? So here you can see the overall ratings, so 10 being a high of each of these and 0 being a low. How beautiful they think the different shorelines are, the perceived economic value of it, and the safety that it is for visitors. And in the green, you can see how it compares to our experts. So again, we're kind of seeing a lot of misalignment here in the sense that our aesthetic beauty is quite low amongst our experts for our seawalls, our ripraps, and our reef balls, but quite high for our residents. The economic value is also an opposing trend. So our experts see a greater economic value the more natural the design is, whereas we see kind of the opposite, a decreasing trend in the perceived economic value of these more natural habitats. The safety for visitors, there's not much variation across the board for our experts, but our public does not feel the same way. They feel like the seawall and the riprap were much more safer for visitors than the reef balls or the oysters. So this is important when we consider especially our living shorelines action that we are going to do for the next 10 years. Think about, okay, why does the public still place so much emphasis on the seawalls, on these ripraps? How do we think about that? Do we go forward with more of these sort of green-gray, these hybrid shorelines, because maybe we can get people more on board, especially private homeowners? Or do we need to think about how do we completely shift this narrative? How do we do this concerted effort to say, no, we want people to see seawalls as undesirable, and we want to see these natural shorelines as the most desirable? In a similar vein, when it came to our water quality evaluations, we again presented people with one of the underwater images and one of the surface water images. These were all selected because they had a variety of color and clarity and sort of debris that was present to them. And so people were presented with these images. They were asked, based on the image, how would you rate the water quality in this photo from poor to bad? How normal do you think this is for Tampa Bay? And some other characteristics like the perceived smell of it and things like that. So I'm just going to focus on the underwater images, which are the most interesting of the ones that we have. In this case, in contrast to the habitat evaluations, we actually see a decent amount, relatively, of alignment between the public and expert perceptions. So we have each of these underwater images down below, and then you can see the overall water quality score. So with 10, a value of 10 being better water quality. And although there is difference directly kind of compared between them, relatively across the board, we see that, our experts are giving the lowest water quality to the same thing that the public is giving the lowest perceived water quality to. So that's actually quite good in the sense that there's not necessarily a misalignment of judgment or evaluation here. We did run a model to see, okay, what characteristics best explain perceptions of water quality. And across the board, we see that the most consistent predictor is actually water clarity as opposed to color, with a caveat saying that the more blue the water is, everybody thinks blue water is beautiful and clean and pristine. But in terms of red coloration, green coloration, not as important as just the clarity of the water itself. So going forward, thinking about the images that we put out in our communications that reporters use, thinking about, okay, if we're telling a story about good water quality, do we want to make sure that we're not, mismatching that message with very, opaque or a very turbid image of the water quality. Another important thing is that looking at all three of these images, The one that was considered to be the most representative of the average condition in Tampa Bay was consistently given the lowest perceived level of water quality. So again, another important thing when it comes to messaging, when it comes to thinking about our inventory of photos, knowing that if we're trying to tell people that the bay is recovering, things are good, you don't have to be concerned, maybe we don't send them these pictures where the water clarity is not very good. I know I was kind of excited to see this because we have I think it was the Tampa Bay Times has did an article and they used a photo of Sheila from our staff and she's underwater. And when I look at that, I'm like, that's an OSHA issue. What is she doing in that water? It is completely it's completely turbid and looks terrible. But then I'm constantly told like, oh yeah, that's quite normal. She's fine. So I was very excited to see this because I was like, these are my people. They get it. This water looks really gross. But another thing to consider as we're doing our communications and things like that. And then the last one that I'm going to highlight here is our experiences with nature over time. So first, we asked folks about their current engagement in different types of nature. So we have what we call indirect experiences with nature. So that's where people are not directly engaging with nature, but it's maybe they're sitting in a room with a view of nature nearby, or they're watching or listening to recordings, so documentaries, podcasts, nature sounds, reading books, etc. And then so we asked how often in an average day, how many hours they spend doing those indirect activities. But then we also have in an average week, the time that they spend more directly in contact with nature and a variety of different types of nature. So we have outdoor sporting areas, which are a bit more manicured types of nature, urban nature areas, which are a bit more natural, but of course quite manicured. Cultivated natural areas, again, getting a little bit more natural, a little bit more wild, but still very, very manicured. And then, of course, we have our wilderness areas, so our pristine, kind of untouched landscapes. And after they told us about their current level of engagement with those, then we asked them to reflect back to either when they were 18 and living in the Tampa Bay area or when they first moved to Tampa Bay. And then answer this same question so that we get a comparison of current versus past amount of time spent in these different activities. And so what we found is what we call some level of extinction of experience with certain types of nature over time. And so that's telling us basically that over time, the number of hours that people are spending interacting with nature is declining. So there's this extinction of nature-based experiences. And what this looks like across the board. So on the x-axis here, you have the amount of time people have been living in Tampa Bay. And on the y-axis here, you have the estimated change in hours per week that we would expect over this time period. And for our indirect experiences, our room with a view of nature, our recordings of nature, we see no significant trend over time. But where we do see a significant decline or extinction of experience is in the people's engagement with outdoor sporting areas, in urban nature areas, and in wilderness areas. And so if we kind of look at wilderness areas, for example, we're seeing a loss of nearly 2 hours per week. The longer that somebody lives in that area, that may seem like not very much, a loss of 2 hours per week. But basically this equates to every 10 years, you're losing 10 to 18 days of your year being able to engage in them. And that's also important to think about that currently, most people are only spending about an average of 3 to 4 hours in these areas to begin with. So it's potentially a complete loss of these interactions over time. We did throw all of this into some more models to see what are some other characteristics that we can identify here. And one of the big things that we did find was that Manatee County residents in particular tend to be showing a sharper decline of experiences with nature over time. But that's just a highlight of all of the different results that we have in here. So if you want to learn more, these are various meetings that we have coming up where I'm going to be doing deeper dives into some specific areas of this. And so we'll be talking more about them. You can learn about them there. Or of course, you can ask me questions and I can answer them. But yeah, thanks.
Clearly, we need to do a lot more messaging about seawalls. So I want to talk about that, Stacy. Julie?
Thanks so much, Blake. I was also interested in this presentation too, as one of the respondents. I think I was put in the expert, no, that's not what we called it. In network, thank you. So thanks for the presentation. I'm curious if in a future iteration of this survey to the public, if we have found the kind of all of these things are high priority or important, is there a way to maybe just make people choose, you know, highest to lowest priority? Like if we know it's all important, but then you just have to pick from, you know, 1 to 10 and you only get number 1 once, maybe that would just shed a little bit of light on like what the people think are the most important things.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we considered in creating this was, do we want people just to allow them to say everything is important or everything's not important, or do we want to force people to kind of create that ranking? And there's pros and cons kind of to each of them, because if somebody does think everything is equally important, they can often get quite frustrated by doing the ranking, and so you can risk people bailing from it. Other people, you know, the difference between, you know, number 1 and number 2 is not actually very close. It's very large. And so we would kind of lose that little difference. So it's really, yeah, just about making it fit for purpose. I think, so we won't necessarily do an iteration of this for quite a while. It's really just geared towards the CCMP revision process. But we do have our community survey that we do every 2 years, and that one's coming up again. That's another one where people are indicating their priorities, and we do in the instructions say, please don't say limit the amount of top priorities to just 3. Sometimes people don't do that. But yeah, so that's another way to kind of get us to gauge at it. It might also be maybe potentially more useful to move that prioritization to actually members of our management conference. So once we get to the TAC, to the CAC, the Restoration Consortium, maybe that's the most opportune time to then say, okay, we know that the public is going to be fine with any of these from a management perspective. Now let's make some of the tough decisions, do some of the triage, and do that prioritization based off of the feedback and things like that. So.
Just wanted to commend Blake. This has been an initiative and an intentional sort of foresight of the program to start using social research science to guide the direction of the program. So he's really dug in on this with a bunch of different tools and surveying. So when we do ask you to participate in them, please do, because we get a lot of great information and able to compare sort of our in-network perceptions versus what the public actually feels about these things. So thank you for those who have participated, but you'll probably see a lot more of this as we continue to do these surveys more and more in the future.
So just curious, because if using the data, probably likely questions could get asked. So the statistical sampling that you're getting in from the public, what's the venue out to them? So are you getting like businesses, people, or is it just through like the website where you may get a flavored statistical sampling?
Yeah, so we have we use a variety of them. So specifically for the public ones, we hire a market research company to distribute it to their various survey panel vendors. And so basically what that is that there'll be people who sign up for websites and opportunities to participate in research. And depending on the platform, it's either like you can get paid 10 cents for every 15-minute survey that you take, or you can earn credits, or there's some kind of incentive to them. And so basically it goes out to all those inventories. And so people will collect that. And that's the primary means for doing it. But because we know that, that's probably a particular type of person who is going and getting themselves onto those networks and those drives. We do also send out mailers. So this year, we sent out about 10,000 paper-based versions of this survey and sent them to random addresses, specifically within areas that we've identified as underserved and overburdened communities, because we know that they're the less likely to have internet access, to have, to be able to be part of those online survey panels and things like that. And so we get about, I think, I didn't put it in here, but I think this year we got about 100 for the mail-in. So about 10% or a little bit more than 10% of our public sample is through the mail-based responses. So that's our effort to try to complement the potential biases of these online, survey panel collections.
And I don't know if it would help, but like our neighborhoods teams have pretty good distributions. They've actually got tools now where they can blast everyone within the neighborhood. So it's not just who signs up. So if you're ever looking for, some of those to go out maybe a little bit broader, from some of our standpoints, we might be able to help get it
that'd be
blasted
great.
out broader.
I'll just put in another plug for our various committees and subcommittee meetings, and specifically the TAC, because I co-facilitate that. We are planning on having a more involved, deeper dive discussion about some of these things to get at these points about prioritization or triaging which things sort of bubble to the top if they're all generally important. How do we pick the most important ones? So I think it's June 17th, the next TAC meeting. If you have staff that go to that, prime them for a deeper dive on these things.
I think this time it would be helpful to hear some feedback from you all. This is sort of us kicking off a CCMP update process. And so if you remember, we did sort of a minor update to the existing format and structure of the CCMP that was adopted back in 2017. So in 2023, I think we finalized that update to make sure that it was reflecting the current state of projects that you've completed, legislative changes, all those sorts of things. But we didn't really dig into the overall structure of each action and activity. For those of you who've been doing this for quite some time, you might remember that the update process in 2017 was a 2-year process where we hosted quite a few meetings, joint meetings of the Agency on Bay and Coastal Management and the Technical Advisory Committee. We brought every single one of the actions to this board, so we sort of piecemealed it out over time. So I guess the question for you all is, do you have a preference for how you'd like to engage in this process going forward? Do you have a vision for what you would like to see for the CCMP for the next decade? I have some opinions, having worked with the CCMP now for a while, and some things that I envision. But first and foremost, this has always been a community blueprint, so it needs to reflect the needs, not just of you all as our management conference, but the community more broadly, like you all are interested in. So like I said, I'm happy to sort of direct this at a staff level, but the extent to which you have pain points with the existing CCMP, things that you could use support on, things that you would like to see changed, how you'd like to engage in the update process. Do you want these sort of like really action-specific engagements over, a year and a half or so timeline? I'm interested in sort of hearing your preliminary feedback right now, because it'll help me shape the TAC engagements, the CAC engagements, and sort of how we bring this information to you to come up with this overall update. Spoiler alert, I'm envisioning a pretty significant overhaul. I don't just want to live with the same document that we have right now. I think there's been quite a bit of change, and the document ought to reflect that. That's my take. I'm not sure if it aligns with your take. So we'd like to complete the update by the end of 2027.
What is the period of time that the update is going to reflect? Like, is it a 3-year horizon?
It's a 10-year planning horizon. And then we revisit it at the 5-year mark to make sure that, everything is kind of up to date. So we're trying to stay pretty true to that.
I guess, one of the things I would offer for what it's worth is we can't do everything. And,
Kelly's in my brain.
we just went through a very significant process with my department and updating our strategic plan. And, God, I love my employees, but the to-do list was 100 miles long. And so what we ended up having to do was actually asking folks to rank things, and, keeping in mind that our board has direction and we have to stay in alignment with that. So how do we align our strategic plan? But it has to be meaningful, and we actually have to be able to get it done. That we are trying to do too much. And so what we ended up having to do is create this humongous parking lot. And we're not saying it's not important. It is important, and we've documented it, and it's there. But for the next, those 3 years, we're kind of looking at the 3 years. What can we actually accomplish well? And so that is our focus. And so it's a much narrower, set of work plan items. But I think it would serve this group well too. I mean, not that I don't go into the CCMP all the time when we're applying for grants and say this aligns with the Tampa Bay Estuary Program CCMP in this area. But, I think if we focused a little more, maybe that would help everyone as far as, when we are asking for support, financial support from our boards and things, to say this is a critical one.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
Not that seawalls aren't driving me crazy now. But, to Blake's presentation, the contaminants of concern. And, I've been paying attention, probably not as much as I should be, to the proposed state rule with regard to artificial turf. And so when I sent in some comments, it was like, oh, Kelly, thanks for this. They are not focused at all on microplastics or the fact that these products are made in God knows where, of God knows what. And, that's just really not the focus. And I said, well, shouldn't it be? I said, we're sitting here, we're having all these conversations about PFAS and other contaminants of concern. And yet, now we're proposing a rule that would basically allow for these huge expansions of artificial plastic, hydrocarbon, whatever, all over the surface of the ground. And, it isn't just you guys are so focused on the stormwater aspect of it and not flooding people that you're missing the bigger picture. These things don't stay in place. I've got pictures of it, from the hurricanes, of this fabric just everywhere, all over the place, from people who had it in their backyards. And, and it breaks down. It breaks down in the sun. And yeah, so what are we doing here?
This has been a conversation that Ed and I have in the evenings about sort of what the path forward ought to be. And some of the nature of the conversation is it's really revolved around this idea of how do we start to stand up monitoring programs that we can sustain over time, that are not competing with the long-term ambient water quality monitoring programs that in some cases we're struggling to maintain now. So we think we've made some great advancements working with ECHRD and USF and the University of Florida, monitoring microplastics and PFAS. There's other good work that's going on about pharmaceuticals. We talked about this in the last CCMP update, but it's all sort of here's a study for this little period of time and then we're done. And none of it is sort of sustained over time and space the way that it needs to be to inform regulations or policy decisions or really long-term management. So this is an important question, I think. How do we balance it with sort of bread and butter of this program of nutrient pollution and how consequential we know that is for the estuary, versus how do we set up, maybe not us in the rest of our careers, but the next generation of people behind us to sort of see this this other threat and give them a framework for how to manage resources in that way. So we've been talking about these things. But yeah, that laundry list of what's in the CCMP is more than 100 actions, more than 100 activities, I should say, almost 40 actions. It is very much a kitchen sink kind of a plan. And even each activity has, in some cases, 3, 4, 5 components to that. So you never can really sort of check it off, say like, hey, we did it, because you maybe did like one sentence of 5. And so it's hard to track progress. These are some of like the challenges of like living with it, but it does provide and afford quite a bit of flexibility. Like Kelly mentioned, when a researcher has an idea or something they want to advance, or when a partner, is struck with something that they need to pursue, there's enough space and flexibility in the plan to allow them to sort of reference it and make that sort of opportunistic progress where it can, but it does make for an overwhelming document to report progress on and to communicate to the public. And I suspect to you all too, I suspect that you don't all have the CCMP, you don't know it all like the back of your hand. Maybe some of you do.
I was just going to say, I think having maybe the prioritization discussions in the committees and have the committees kind of elevate the conversation or frame the conversation up to the management board will be helpful for the management board to have conversations about. These are the priorities that the TAC and the Habitat Management Committee, the committees came up with first. And maybe that gives more weight to what, again, if it's a 10-year kind of living document, I know we do update it, but if it's
just once the 5-year mark,
if it's a 10-year forwardly looking document, having the committees at least prioritize what is important to them might help it. And then, again, like as a management board, discuss that. So maybe we don't lose the kitchen sink, in all of it. It can still kind of be there, but it's an elevated approach. So then we kind of have a better, as a management board, guidebook on these are top priorities to focus on, to put money towards. And then a question too, do we in this process look from the 2017 to the 2027 plan of accomplishments or kind of gaps that we should be focusing on for the next decade? Like, how do the plans kind of tie together for future work?
So in 2023, we went through that. 2022 to 2023, we went through that exercise of making sure that we were reflecting accomplishments, at least in the background narrative, and we made a few minor revisions to some of the activities and actions. We would do that process again, and that would be part of working with EPA and the management conference to recommend retiring certain actions. Again, I'm not quite certain on sort of what the path forward is because we're still visioning what this looks like. But it is possible that there wouldn't be like strong continuity between the plans. We might re-envision the actions altogether. And so we have to negotiate with EPA sort of what that looks like. If we're retiring a particular action because we made so much progress, or retiring it because we need a sort of new approach that we need to articulate in the plan going forward. I'm kind of, I think, with you that there's utility. I think we're hearing from the public to have sort of the kitchen sink in like background matter, so that one could still cite the background material that's associated with a particular action, but maybe really focusing on tightening up the specific activities that are listed in there to those things that are truly the highest priority, that have a clear champion and owner, that we know we want to be working into either our grant programs or our annual work plans over the next 10 years, like those things that are like more clearly defined. Like another thing that we have a lot of in our CCMP is sort of like these aspirational activities where there's not an assigned responsible party. We don't know how much money it's going to cost, and there's no clear plan for like when it would be launched or when it would be finished. So I think that's kind of, yeah, where I would kind of focus on tweaking things, I think.
I think we are going to rely a lot on our partners sitting around this room to strike that balance. I'm also aligned with Maya's thinking that streamlining the document is an appropriate step now, almost 40 years into the program. So taking that approach, but also not losing sight of some of the aspirational things that we do need to still make progress on, or, push on the forefront in our region where we're lacking and maybe falling behind in terms of monitoring research or other things going on in other regions throughout the country. So, like I said, we'll be relying on you all to kind of help us find that balance. Our preference is going to be towards that streamlining, I think, this version. But we still want your input on not entirely getting rid of all the kitchen sink issues, especially if we haven't made significant progress on them. But they would just become less of a sort of priority within this iteration.
And I just want to add that I think it would be helpful for the discussion to understand any requirements that are coming down. So what does the EPA say about what the CCMP should include? And just so as we're having these discussions that we're ensuring that we're keeping that in mind too, if we're trying to streamline, that we're not missing something big. So
they'll let us know.
We can do that now before we submit it. We can sort of set out the guideposts that are there from EPA. We can do that.
Yeah, that would be helpful. And this is something similar that, the district has discussions as we update our swim plans of making sure all the stakeholders are coming in and things that the district has control over for the resources and identifying actionable items through those. So very similar discussions. I feel your pain on a probably more concentrated level with those priority water bodies, but I think streamlining would be helpful. I think of it in terms of if somebody comes new to this committee and you're going to onboard them, like what are the things that they need to know? And taking that CCMP as it is right now is quite a task to go through, and just to go through it. And then you're trying to understand and synthesize that information and create actionable items for your agency. So I think that's maybe something good to keep in mind as we move through this as well.
I have a question. Are there any topics, I guess, that the National Estuary Program wants you to, like the other programs around the country are doing, that you need to latch onto or anything like that? Or are they each regionally independent?
The plans are regionally specific. It's sort of the three buckets that we always talk to you about: thriving habitats and abundant wildlife, water, clean waters and sediments, and informed, engaged, responsible community. Those are like the sort of major components that each CCMP needs to address in some way. Every NEP has their own version of that language. Many of the required components we already have in place, so we might be looking at those too, but you need the research and monitoring, you need research priorities and a monitoring program, you need a communications plan, you need habitat goals, those sorts of things, which we've, got all of those components. It's sort of how to wrap it all together. Felicia, I don't know if you're still online, if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
Hi, yes, I'm here. One thing that EPA is currently doing, we are in the process of updating our CCMP guidance right now. So this is very useful information that I'm hearing from you guys going forward. It aligns with the Clean Water Act 320. So we should have a clear view about what the act itself says that the estuary programs were created to do. So that's a starting. So other than that, Maya, I think you've covered the rest.
Okay. When will the Clean Water Act be updated? Is that or when will the guidance? She won't. Felicia, are you able to share when the guidance for the CCMP might be completed?
We are in the process of updating quite a few guidances. Hopefully this year, we go through different versions and go back and forth. But the estuary program anniversary is next year. So we're trying to get all this stuff done this year so we can roll out stuff next year. So hopefully
Okay.
soon is all I can say. Hopefully soon.
Appreciate that, Felicia.
Anything additional? Hearing none. The next meeting is August 14th.
Sorry,
Oh.
Kelly, is there, it's a sad thing that happened at the Marine Science Center. Are we, this region, how are we helping USF or students or researcher, like what's up post-fire? Can we just, is that an not acceptable conversation right now? I don't know.
Do you want to just, from our standpoint, we did extend an offer to the dean and his staff, faculty, and students to use some of our space if needed at the estuary program. We're also supporting some of the monitoring programs in our work plan. I know that the St. Pete Ocean team is going to start a conversation around donations. So if that's of interest to the partners, I could send that information out as that's more fully developed.
They're still assessing their needs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the student group from College of Marine Science has a GoFundMe thing that's open, just, you know, as an immediate thing. And
Anything else? All righty, we'll have a wonderful weekend and we'll see you next time.